morning, it's Lainy here from Achievement for All again, and today I'm joined by John Drew. And John has done an awful lot of work and training, in fact, on the subjects that we're going to be talking about today. And this is mainly about leaders and managers and kind of what they might be facing when they go back to work in education, because obviously a lot's happened in the time that we've had off. And John, lovely to have you here. Thank you for coming and joining me. What do you think they might be facing when they come back? What are the sort of key things you think they may or may not be expecting?
Well, I think certainly, good morning, by the way. I think certainly for leaders and managers, one of the things that they're all thinking about is how they can prepare their workforce for coming back into the workplace, and certainly what that new normal, that's a phrase we're hearing a lot, isn't it? What the new normal might look like, and so particularly in terms of what staff and colleagues might have experienced over this strange circumstance that we find ourselves in, and how that may impact on their performance. And I think first and foremost in everyone's mind is sort of, how do I ensure that there's a safe return back to work? I mean, some figures I was looking at recently suggested that 61% of colleagues in schools are concerned or very concerned about social distancing measures in place for students. And something like over half, 50% more, were expressing concerns for staff and colleagues' well-being.
Yes.
And I think what we have to do is set some kind of context to it, because the search for a vaccine isn't going to end soon. And so any kind of reopening is going to require some increased constraints. And certainly what we're all talking about is planning a phased return to service, whether that's perhaps year 6 coming back into primary schools, perhaps year 10 and year 12 coming back into secondary schools. And I think for me, it's important to recognise that it's going to take time for people to feel safe enough to return to some level of normal working practice after this pandemic. And it's going to require a phased approach.
I think that's the thing, is it's not going to be back to the way it was, is it? You're not walking back into what was there before. And I think that's a really important point, isn't it?
Absolutely, because we've got to ask ourselves, what are we returning to? You know, is education going to be forever altered now that distance learning is a reality for many students? And so I think for me, what's key is providing some training to colleagues on what those new rules are going to be. And one of the things I've been reading about, and I would certainly suggest, is perhaps creating a digital handbook containing all those new rules and ways of working, so that folks can read that prior to returning to work.
I think that's a really good idea, because actually sometimes what happens, and you know, we've all done it if we've been in jobs where we've been leaders and managers, you work it all out between you and you think you've got a really good plan, but sometimes what happens is you forget to communicate the plan maybe in as much detail as you need to, so that when people are coming back, they know what to expect, because you just start your plan the minute they walk in, but you haven't prepared them for the plan.
Yeah, and again, it's about managing expectations and being absolutely realistic. I mean, I think we have to do what we can to reduce uncertainty. And, you know, one of the ways you do that is by regularly communicating any new information and decisions that you make to your team at your earliest convenience, and be prepared to answer their questions and seek more information if you need to. To be patient, you know, communicating what you know when you know it with your team. But at the same time reinforcing how important going forward it's going to be to practice patience, to allow the data and the science to inform the decisions that we make at that time. And you do that by, I think, surveying your organisation, get a pulse, get a feeling for the organisational expectations and the needs of transitioning back to the workplace. And lots of ways you can do that when we're all using different sort of e-learning platforms and forms of communication. So, you know, host some focus groups, get some feedback, let those ideas inform strategies for returning to work.
And I think, you know, you were talking about patience there, and I sort of really picked up on that, because I think there's going to be a point of adjustment, isn't there? And it's going to be everybody's adjusting from a different point of view. A lot of people will have maybe lost loved ones, have had people ill in hospital, they may have been ill, or they'll be touched by it in other ways, because obviously people might have money worries, might have home problems. And so actually that patience with people, because they're human, and that period period of adjustment, do you think it might be bigger than we're imagining it to be?
It's hard to know, isn't it? Because there's so much anecdotal information out there. There's so much, and we aren't a party to the scientific evidence that's being presented, and so we only hear secondhand, if you like, about the decisions made around that kind of information. And so for me, in preparing for the transition back to work, I think we're going to see a situation where we are creating more remote learning opportunities and sharing online resources so that our team can address that. And we need to make sure that we're individually connecting with members of our teams.
Yeah, I think that's really important, isn't it? I know some of the work that you work on as well is around trauma, isn't it? And about how to support people in those situations. So just moving to that bit, maybe a little bit, what sort of tips can you give the leaders and managers in managing their staff? Because obviously we're going to talk a little bit in another video about how the staff can manage it for their students. But in order for them to do that, they need to be supported by their leadership team as well, don't they? What can we do to help?
What can we do? Well, I think realise that it's understandable to feel anxious. It's understandable to feel worried about what might happen, especially when so many aspects of our lives are being affected. And the sad reality is that deaths of relatives and or teachers will have far greater impacts on children than the last few weeks of school year being at home schooled. And we need to think about how we're going to accommodate that and how we're going to improve our personal sense of control and our own resilience going forward.
And other things that we can do to help with our resilience or build it back up again if we've lost a lot of it.
Well, I mean, the great thing about Achievement for All, obviously, is that we've got some fantastic work that's been done around wellbeing, particularly for children who are looked after and vulnerable students in schools. And we've got some fantastic resources in our emotion coaching modules as well, that colleagues, certainly colleagues within Achievement for All, have access to, and people can look at what those programs look like that we are involved in, and there's so much good information, there's so much good advice, and I'll talk a little bit later about what we can do to improve our own resilience and our own emotional regulation as well.
Okay, so in terms of the leaders taking it on, because I know we've put it in Achievement for All, we talk about children quite a lot, but I've been using them with adolescents and quite older people, and actually the same rules apply. Absolutely. And actually the same rules apply for adults. So if you are speaking to people or you're emotion coaching, as we often talk about, actually you can do that with adults as well, can't you? You can do some of what you've just said, which is recognise they're going to have feelings, allow them to have those feelings, and it isn't about solving their feelings, is it? It isn't about saying it'll be all right, don't worry, it'll be fine. Because we want to say that sometimes, don't we? And actually that's sometimes not the right thing to say to people, is it'll be fine, you will be okay. Right there when you're in that distress, that isn't really the best thing to say, is it?
No, and I think Beer Brown puts it really succinctly when she talks about empathy drives connection, sympathy has the potential to fuel disconnection. No empathic response ever began with the words "at least."
Yes.
And I think it's you know, the phrase I use, particularly for adults, is around developing a meta-emotional philosophy and self-regulation. And I use the analogy of putting your oxygen mask on before you help others. Now, if you're on that aircraft and you do pay attention to the in-flight briefing, they will say that, you know, in the event of decompression, an oxygen mask will fall down from the ceiling. Please put your oxygen mask on before you help others. And in the same way that a frightened, angry child can't learn or function, a frightened, angry adult can't learn, can't function well. So it's important that we take the time to develop that meta-emotional philosophy, and that's key to the process, really, recognizing that the emotional world of adults involved in helping with emotion coaching and self-regulation is as important as the emotions being expressed by the child or the young person in their own emotional moment.
Yeah, and I think in terms of the leadership and management, you're going to be helping your staff but these are the things that you need to know for yourself, because you'll have gone through something.
Yes.
You might be feeling different mixed emotions, so you need to do some self-care in order to bring yourself to a point where you can care for others and help them care for others. So it's quite a chain, isn't it? When you're sort of the leader of a team, you could be leading several different stages of that chain, right the way down to the child or the young person, student. So you do need to look at you, look at your staff and their teams, but look at your managers as well, because they've got their staff teams, and eventually the young person at the end of it all. So it's quite a complicated chain, really, isn't it?
It's a complicated chain, but also don't forget that leaders are themselves parents. They
Absolutely.
are themselves children. They have their own particular vulnerabilities as well. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean you're invulnerable to all of the social anxiety that everyone else is experiencing.
Absolutely. And there's lots of, when I've done lots of leadership training, there's lots about being human, isn't there? That actually showing a little frailty every now and then, or a little vulnerability, is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. That if you always look as though you're always coping and you've got a hard exterior, actually that doesn't make people warm to you, and that doesn't actually help them. And
of course, you also run the risk of developing toxic stress in your own professional practice as well. So, it's really important for leaders to accept all emotions are valid. Yeah. We're all experiencing a whole range, a whole gamut of different emotions at the moment, and every single one of those emotional responses is absolutely valid. It's okay to feel anxious. Yeah. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel frightened. It's okay to feel apprehensive, because they are normal and natural human emotions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We're going to do another video similar to this with a bit more detail in how the teachers can help and support the young people and the students, aren't we? So if you're interested in taking this conversation further, join us for our next video. But I think what we've really sort of pointed to here is there's something about self-care, there's something about patience, there's something allowing a transition for your staff as well, and that actually help is needed all the way along the line, isn't it? So that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much, John. What I'd like to say to our people watching our video today, that if you valued what we've talked about and it is of interest, do click on the link as you see it come up and pop a £1 in the pot towards the charity, and that will keep us going and helping young people in the future. Thank you. Thank you, John.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye-bye.